Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this dialogue with the new Untouchables after a week hiatus for the Thanksgiving holiday. And we are recording this on Friday, December 5th, 2025 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as always, we are joined and so fortunate to have in the upper left here, looks like Paul Peltier, former veteran prosecutor at the Department of Justice, currently in private practice and an adjunct professor at George Washington University. To his immediate right, at least on my screen, we have June Carbone, of course, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. Down on the lower right, currently we have Mark Dan. He, of course, is in private practice, but former Attorney General of the state of Ohio. And as you can see behind him, the proprietor of Dan Law. And of course, to my lower left, or to my immediate left, it looks like William K. Black, pretty much, let's say, Gandalf of the entirety of white collar corruption, but stemming for decades working with the Department of Justice and criminology and all manner, shape, or form of the law and economics to give us a robust understanding of how, unfortunately, our country has become exactly what he's been teaching us about for about 3 decades now. Guys, it has been an insane week. I think I want to just visit first a couple of just some of the headlines of what we've been seeing across the board. And I wanted to just, whoops, hold on one second. I mean, it just doesn't end, I don't think, from a standpoint of earlier in the week, we of course saw the Government Accountability Office open up investigations into FHA Chief Bill Pulte. And of course, this panel has been talking about that months before this has become mainstream news in the cases, of course, Adam Schiff and Letitia James and Lisa Cook. Further, the grand jury threw out the indictment against Letitia James for the second time, which is trending, of course, in a lot of social media. Further to that, though, what's taken up a lot of airtime this week in all of the news cycle is, of course, congressional investigation into the Secretary of Defense / War, Pete Hegseth. And there was, right before I hit record on this, a New York Times revelation that video said to show that boat strike survivors were waving from the overturned hull, which of course brings up a lot of the questions you guys have been addressing for some time. Of course, it was a big surprise to a lot of people that the arrest of the pipe bomber suspect, in light of all things Kash Patel and his girlfriend and J6, and I think a lot of people were surprised it wasn't Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then, of course, the Supreme Court agrees to review Trump orders restricting birthright citizenship. That just happened. And of course, the panel votes to stop recommending hepatitis B shots at birth for most newborns. And then also, earlier, we were made aware by Lewis Clark, who may or may not be able to join us today, but Judge Boasberg had made the decision that it looks like the decision that may have gone against court orders, of course, in the Alien Enemies Act was, of course, our Director of Homeland Security, among other things. And then on a lighter note, Olivia Nuzzi is trending because Vanity Fair cut ties. So I think, I don't know, there's a lot of places we can start, but one place I wanted to start, if you guys don't mind, is I want to direct this to June and Bill out of the gate, because I came across an article in the New York Times about fraud by Somalis during the pandemic. And of course, this followed off the heels of last week's shooting of National Guard members in DC, which further underscored the immigration position or anti-immigration position of all things Donald Trump. I wonder if you guys can kind of give us some insight into how that's rolling out and what that means in the grander national picture, all things considered.
Bill, go for it.
Okay. Yes, there was a COVID related fraud scheme. And yes, it did involve a number of Americans in Minnesota of Somali descent. Now, Trump decried this 2 days after pardoning a massive fraudster who
Gentile.
all by himself created vastly greater losses than, every fraud a Somali has ever created in the United States. And when he rolled this out as a claim, not a single reporter even pointed this out. And it then prompted Trump to go on, and this is saying something, his most openly racist rant of his entire life, and an extended one in front of the press at a press conference, or what passes for a press conference under the Trump administration, in which he declared that people of Somali descent are garbage, that none of them should be allowed to be Americans, that they should go back to their country, even if they were born in the United States, by the way, and decreed that they were made Minnesota into a hellhole. I think was the exact language, or just hell. In any event, he then proceeded to go after Representative Ilhan Omar, who is from the St. Paul area, um, and said, they say that she married her brother as part of a fraud scheme to get into the United States, and that therefore she should be expelled from the United States and sent to Somalia. And not a single reporter asked a follow-up question such as, who is the they that say this, because it's a lie and she's, refuted it, and there's nothing, I mean, there's simply no there to the lie, and such. So we have reached this stage in America where he feels comfortable in his racism and feels comfortable that he will not be called on any of these things. So just the super short version. Oh, I'm sorry. Tom Emmer then added in.
Mhm.
Now, Tom Emmer is the number three guy in the House leadership. He is the whip. And Tom Emmer actually, his district has more Somalis than Omar's district. So these are his constituents who 10 years ago he gave the opposite speech condemning these kinds of attacks. But in the MAGA era, of course, he could only become whip if he bent the knee. And so he proceeded not only to take Trump's lies and amplify them, but to create his own lie that 80% of all the crime in the Twin Cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis, were due to Somalis. Now, that's an interesting trick because we don't even keep statistics that have, your ethnic background. So he just made it up. And again, the reporters didn't say, where the F are you getting this from? That's a lie. Show us the evidence. Whereupon he would have had to blah, 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 do his thing. So we've reached that stage. And again, if you want to know why it's critical to listen to folks like my colleagues, is we don't put up with that bullshit and we answer these things. As to the hellhole thing, Wallet Hub, of all things, have just come out with their state survey, and Minnesota was number four in the nation in desirable characteristics. And in particular, in fact, the top five are all clustered in just a point and a half in the scale between them, type of thing. They're essentially identical. And guess how many of them are red states? Yeah, that'd be zero, type of thing. And in particular, Minneapolis has a really high, here's a little bit of statistics, folks, median as opposed to mean or average. That means the midpoint in the range, not the average. It has one of the highest median incomes in the United States. It doesn't have anywhere near as high average income, which is to say, we don't have the billionaires here.
Mhm.
They go into the warm places and such. But we have a perfectly nice place. And guess what? Why did Somalis come to Minneapolis? Here's a hint. Minneapolis is cold, especially compared to Somalia. Because in Somali culture, one of the top values that they have is hospitality. And they found Minnesotans to be hospitable, which, with exceptions such as Tom Emmer, is in fact one of the attraction of the places. So, nope, not a hellhole. And they're lying consistently to feed folks so that they will produce terrible things. You can imagine what the ICE officers recruited and self-selecting into an administration like this are going to do to people of Somali descent as soon as they get their hands on them.
Well, June, this kind of further underscores what I've been learning from you, we've been learning from you throughout, but I think it bears repeating from this perspective. Senator Mark Kelly gave a tremendous speech this week. I think he spoke, I watched the entirety of it because I had to just filter through all of the social media reaction to try to hear what he had to say. And here, of course, is a veteran of 25 years in the Navy. I think he's Top Gun. He's obviously an astronaut, very capable, very detailed, engineered like mind. And he had to deliver basically a fourth grade speech, it felt like to me, about character, about what's happening in the administration, about some of the obvious hypocrisy that Bill had just pointed out, in the most simplistic language I have ever heard to a whole, press room filled with the press. And I didn't see much come out of that from them that captured the essence of a speech about character. It's ridiculous, the failure of the press. I'm wondering if you can kind of tie some of these things together from where you're sitting.
Well, I have been saying for some time that the last institution left in American society that still works as an institution, where the institution is greater than the individuals in it, that still stands for honor, for self-sacrifice, and that commands a measure of legitimacy from the public is the U.S. military. And for that reason, it will be next on the chopping block of the Trump administration. And I'm sad to report that I've been right about that. What Trump is doing is not just disgracing himself and Pete Hegseth. I mean, they like to talk about masculinity, and here they are. When the going gets tough, they skedaddle in the other direction. They are, both Trump and Hegseth, the very image of cowardice, of lack of responsibility, of lack of support for the people under them who have made sacrifices to carry out their directives. They have no honor. They have never had honor. And unfortunately, what they are also doing is removing the top brass that represents the best of military traditions. They are removing the true experts who are prepared to fight wars. They are endangering our troops. They are gutting the requirements for the military, taking less qualified people, the white male DEI candidates who are their darlings, because they are Trump supporters and because they represent this mindset of cruelty. Cruelty is the point. We've been saying that about the MAGA movement for some time. I think it's important to remember in one of the Republican debates before Donald Trump became the nominee in 2016, there's a discussion of healthcare. There is a reaction against Obamacare. And there is a debate in which one of the Republican candidates they're talking about, well, what happens to these 20-year-olds who don't want to sign up for Obamacare because they think they're immortal? And what happens when they get into an automobile accident and they show up at the hospital and it ends up being a whole lot more expensive to treat them in the emergency room? The Republican audience yelled, "Let him die." That's the mindset. Pete Hegseth thinks killing people shows he's tough. No. What's tough What's masculine is when, I won't use the word four-letter word, starts flying, you stand up in front of the people under you. Instead, he's running for cover. He is the image of dishonesty, cowardice, dishonor, and he is unfit. If he were an officer in the US military, he'd be drummed out, and we should be drumming him out. So before we go on, let me simply link this to two other things. One is I simply want to say on the Somalis having come to Minnesota. This is one of the great success stories. The Somalis are an important and successful part of Minnesota. You don't hear a lot here. You do hear about a certain number of fraud cases, and they're using that as a club to go after Walz in his reelection bid, the governor. But you don't hear a lot about Somalis being a problem in Minneapolis. There are other groups you hear about being a problem in Minneapolis. Somalis are overwhelmingly a success story of groups that have settled in the United States, become highly educated, contribute to this community. The other thing that the mainstream media is not talking about, under the rubric of incompetence and dishonor, is Afghanistan. Trump decided, somewhat impulsively, he was going to withdraw from Afghanistan. Never mind that we have allies there. Never mind that we have people who have stuck out their lives to be partners with the U.S. And when he did it, and this is what wasn't talked about in the beginning of the Biden administration and isn't being talked about now, he did just what he's doing to the Ukrainians. First, he meets separately with the Taliban. He doesn't include our allies, the Afghan government. Then he manages to have this arbitrary timetable for withdrawal that is guaranteed to be disastrous. Then he leaves office. Biden comes in. Biden, by the way, had long opposed during the Obama administration the U.S.'s continued involvement in Afghanistan. And Biden is left with a choice. Stick with the the Trump timetable that's already underway, or send in more troops, which Biden doesn't want to do and would be unpopular in the U.S. He withdraws. Biden takes the blame for what really is a situation Trump stupidly engineered, incompetently designed. I'm not going to say we should have stayed in Afghanistan forever, but it was classic Trump. Impulsive, betrayed our allies, incompetently designed, and led to a disaster. Biden ended up owning that disaster, in large part because nobody blamed Trump. Yeah, there's discussion. It's in the newspaper. You read the back pages of the New York Times, you'll find a discussion of all of this. You don't hear it from Democrats. And because it's complicated, you're not going to hear it now. But you want to know why they're Afghani refugees in the United States? Blame Donald Trump. And blame Donald Trump again for precipitous, poorly planned, and dishonorable withdrawal, in which we brought in only a small number of the people who might have qualified as refugees because of working directly with the United States.
Well,
And
and what
we
is it? What
released
is
the Taliban prisoners who became the shock troops in the takeover. And from my brothers in the U.S. military, this would be called Bravo Oscar, the bug out. That's what Trump always does. He goes Bravo Oscar as soon as things get bad. He just ducks out, as you say, and leaves other people to deal with the disaster.
Yeah,
well, and
he
who's
scheduled
gonna?
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, I mean, who in the next conflict, who's gonna translate for the Americans on the ground? Who's gonna provide the intelligence that these Afghanis, patriotic Afghans did, who would probably rather be in their own country, if they could be in a country where they would have any, civil rights. and wouldn't have to live under Sharia law. But in the next conflict, and there's going to be one, who would ever trust the United States again, and cooperate with them and assist them on the ground? I mean, 250 years of credibility it gets wiped out in single racist and a single racist impulsive rant.
And Mark, to follow up with you, I want to and by the way, welcome Lewis, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. But on that note, I want to blend this question to you, Mark, first, picking up on there, and it's going to kind of blend a couple of things, because I remember first, I just want this to linger because of the Government Accountability Office and their investigation into Bill Pulte, which you brought up several months ago. So just let that linger there as it relates to those cases, particularly because it's your expertise, mortgage fraud, right? But just based on what we were talking about, I remember being in Cleveland and observing the incredible history of immigrants in Cleveland, right? Your city was built by immigrants, and I know the Slavic nations and the entirety of the great history of the industrialization and the labor force. This was the ultimate American dream. And when you consider those two aspects, and then something, I don't want it to feel far afield, but at the same time, we have to address this. Mark Kelly's reaction was to, of course, illegal orders to service members to follow lawless orders that he then turned around and said he's going to attack anybody who provides that sort of direction to the military to not follow his illegal orders as somebody who's guilty of treason. Anyway, that's a lot to pack in there, but I mean, if anybody can unpack it, you certainly can.
Yeah, well, let's first, the second largest Somali community in the United States is in Columbus, Ohio. I had the good fortune of working with great leaders and Somali citizens. We had Somali refugees or former refugees that worked in the Attorney General's office when I was there. There are members of the State General Assembly who are of Somali background. They have as an immigrant group, they have been incredibly distinguished themselves and made a huge mark and have provided great things for the people of the city of Columbus. And I'm sure it's the same in Minneapolis, starting businesses, supporting other people's businesses, organizing politically, organizing culturally, to assist and to become very integrated parts of the community. And the attack on them is just blatantly and blandly racist, and it's really. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say except that June keeps saying that cruelty is the point. Certainly, I think racism is also the point. And it's racism. I'm reading Mark Twain's biography that recently came out, and he grew up in a time full of the same anti-immigrant fears and anxiety. This is as old as that. Yet, Patrick, you're exactly right. In communities, that I've been part of throughout Ohio, Youngstown, where I spent a lot of years, and in Cleveland, we needed people to operate steel mills, and those people came from all over the world, and they settled in Cleveland, and they had the resistance of people like the Ku Klux Klan and others, and they overcame that. And I think it's tragic that 100 years later, Trump would like to reignite that battle and that hatred that took 100 years to overcome. And I don't, no political office is worth that. I truly worry for the future of the country. The rest of your question, Patrick, I've completely
Bill
lost.
Pulte,
So,
Bill Pulte,
yeah.
FHA.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, well, look, I mean, I think the headline of the time, and I have been here for a couple of weeks. The headline that that I didn't get a chance to talk about here was Andy Borowitz's column where he said that this year the turkeys aren't going to be pardoned because they didn't make an appropriate bribe to the president. The idea that these are the private playgrounds, that these agencies that are now being run by Trump appointees because of the fact that they're being run by Trump appointees are the private, essentially the private property of those employees. And I mean, not only did Bill Pulte paw through the files, the mortgage files of private mortgage borrowers, which are by all federal law and regulation private. When he reported out, he got it wrong. He and so he exaggerated and misrepresented what was in those files to the Justice Department, and the Justice Department then acted on those false representations. It's truly stunning. And look, I mean, everybody applying for a mortgage loan, everybody applying for a credit card, everybody who files a tax return needs to worry that these people are going to take your information. We also do a lot of data breach litigation. By the way, I finally got the final fuck off letter from the IRS about their Palantir contracts. And so they've invited us to sue them under the Public Records Act, and we're going to take them up on that invitation. But they have this huge data company has now is not just acquiring data, but they've been hired by these agencies to consolidate this data in the search in the search for people who are in the country illegally, or people who could be accused of being in the country illegally, because you can't even rely on the accusations that these folks make. But I think when the public understands that Big Brother, in the sense of the Bill Pultes of the world and the Social Security administrators appointed by Trump. I don't even know the name, and the IRS administrators. Martin O'Malley is an old friend of mine who was the Social Security administrator under Biden. And he is just, we had a long conversation a couple of weeks ago about the absolute rape of the data that's held by the Social Security Administration, by this administration. And maybe they're using it to hunt immigrants, but maybe they're using it for political purposes. We just don't know. But the fact is, we have a expectation that certain data, certain information about us, our mortgage applications, our Social Security information, our tax returns, our Social Security numbers are going to be kept private. And I think that there's a huge problem here. And I think that when that gets exposed, and this horrible marriage between the MAGA folks and the tech bros, and the tech bros applying all this data science now to your government information that's being held, was acquired for a good reason and is about to be exploited, or already has been exploited to a certain extent for bad reasons. It's so much. I believe it's so much bigger than what we've seen at FHFA and other places. So I'm hoping that we can be part of exposing that. I think we need to. More efforts need to be made to attack that. It's another place where we can, where our side, and where we need to fire a few more missile strikes in our lawfare there. And by the way, one last thing I wanted to respond to June. The opposite of masculinity is shooting a missile at somebody who's begging for their life, floating on the piece of a raft in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That is the opposite of what a masculine person would do. To call that masculine is an insult to people who value that quality in people. It's just wrong, and it's tragic that we have again that cruelty is the point there, and that there's not more outrage. Yeah, I'm getting a little worried that we're getting a little immune, and to because there's just been so much horrible stuff, that these stories, every time you hear them, they just seem a little less offensive because there's just such a volume of this disregard of the rights and responsibilities and the obligations that the government has, the compact between the government and its people, and frankly the compact between the United States and the rest of the world, that is sacred, and that has allowed this country to prosper. We're now getting ready to plan the 250th anniversary of the country, which is terrifying because I thought we just did the 200th anniversary. It seems like it was a week ago, but here we are. But this is, will this be the last 50 years that this country is able to survive? Because we're going to take sorry, I guess it's profane day. We're going to take a shit on all those building blocks on which we've built our safety and security, and our compact with one another. And I'm really truly worried about the future of that.
Well, it's definitely a water cannon, and we know that Lewis's operation is certainly neck deep in all things data breach, vis-a-vis a case that he had introduced to us earlier. But I've got to get Paul's reaction because I have a feeling you're going to really take this appropriate response to next level. But I've been itching to ask you this, Paul, considering your career at the DOJ, specifically as it related. I was always so impressed with your experience with La Cosa Nostra and all things international crime rings, right? And so we just saw, in the midst of attacking Venezuela based on supposedly, accusations of narco cartels and that sort of thing that led to this insanity that we're talking about, but also releasing the Honduran president after being convicted of 48 years and 400 tons of cocaine. How would you feel to start that off if you were the lead prosecutor that put him away?
Well, let me level. I'll answer that question, but there's a lot on the table here. In the spirit of Thanksgiving, let me level set where we are, because it's been about 2 weeks since we've done this last time. Since that time, I think tens of thousands more children have died in Africa due to the defunding of USAID and PEPFAR. We shouldn't forget that. Since that time, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump Donald Trump specifically has entered into some contracts with the U.S. government that's paying him tens of millions of dollars that makes Hunter Biden's fiasco look like child's play. I read something today that Eric Trump, who is the dumb of the dumb ones, is the dumbest of the dumb ones. Eric Trump is 10 times richer already than when President Trump was elected. And then finally, Trump has continued to pardon fraudsters at a remarkable level, corrupt fraudsters and corrupt politicians at a remarkable level. And he's pardoning these people who have not yet paid back their victims or returned money to the victims. And I think the through line in all of this is, as Bill and June have been talking about already, the reason why he wanted to get rid of USAID and PEPFAR, in my view, is precisely because he hates Black Africans, and he's always been a racist in that regard. And that's why they do not have a human quality to him, which is why when tens of thousands, if not millions of people are dying, it has no impact. I don't know how we can forget that as a society, but we don't talk about it enough, number one. Number two, in terms of pardoning, I believe he does not look at corruption and fraud as a crime. Mm-hmm. And he sees that as the way to do business and the way to get business. And that's the third thing. And that is the fact that he's getting richer is his transactional way of living. He thinks getting richer, no matter how you do it, is fine. So you asked specifically about how would you feel about if someone you had worked to convict, and remember, the prior Trump administration is the one who investigated the president of Honduras, right, and brought the charges. He was convicted under Biden. He was convicted by a jury, and when they asked him, why did you release him? He said, well, he's the president of a country and they're responsible for everything. And, that's unfair that they're convicted, as if that was the only evidence that was brought forth. But the way I look at it is he's going to continue to do that crap because he has a serious psychological problem. But but it's telling, because when you look at the reason that they supposedly are going after Venezuelan boats who are 20 tanks of gas away from the United States. They're not, these drugs are not coming to the United States, number one. Number two, if you cared, and it's not fentanyl, it's not killing people directly, if it is coming to the United States, and if it was drug on that boat. The videotape I recently saw, there were barrels on the boat. And they don't transport cocaine in barrels. They transport fuel in barrels. And so I sincerely doubt that there were drugs on that boat, number one. But so if the reason why you're really doing that is to prevent drugs from coming into the United States, first of all, you wouldn't pardon the president of Honduras who did it times 4 million. Number two, you would stop those boats. You would interdict them. The ships are there. They could do it. You would arrest the people. You would talk to them. You would get them to flip up. How do you think we went up to the tops of the cartels in Miami, in Colombia? You flip people who you catch red-handed with the drugs, and they have to flip, and you go up the chain. There's none of that's happening because, in truth and in fact, there's no desire to do that, and it just shows the subterfuge of all of it. And the subterfuge is, in my opinion, that he wants the fuel and gas reserves in Venezuela. He wants to strike a deal with them. They won't do it. Marco Rubio hates Venezuela because they cooperate with Cuba. And Marco Rubio hates Cuba, and it entirely is a ginned up reason for blowing these boats up, period. And he's trying to extract leverage over the president of Venezuela so that he can get fuel contracts with them and get access to their gasoline reserves. In my opinion, that's it. Because if it had anything to do with drugs, you wouldn't be doing what they were doing. So that's where I come down on it.
Oh, at least we found a tradition that Trump's willing to respect, which is that America goes to war for oil.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes, well, this has been going on for years, particularly.
Finally found something that he's willing to honor.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wish you would say it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's not forget UAE and all things Hamas and all things, CZ, but we could go on that note as well, not to mention MBS. But Louis, welcome back. And the last time we talked, and boy, am I excited to see you from the standpoint that, happy post-Thanksgiving. I'm sure you guys are working around the clock right now on so many cases. But we had talked about 2 weeks ago, Judge Boasberg reaching rulings, whether or not, of course, through one of the whistleblowers that you represent, in the case of Emile Beauvais, and obviously disregarding orders or the decision, right, of the court, that now we're also looking at the person responsible for that may have been Kristi Noem. Is there a particular place you want to pick up, or maybe even go another direction with that information that is probably front and center?
Well, it's very interesting. I think what really happened there is the Department of Justice has decided to essentially throw the Department of Homeland Security under the bus. The driving force is essentially Stephen Miller and the driving force is the leadership of the Department of Justice in terms of deciding that they were going to send these detainees, most of whom had nothing to do with any kind of gangs whatsoever, and actually the vast majority of whom didn't even have a single criminal ticket of any sort to their record. So, essentially they're just detainees, and they might have had tattoos, and they decided to send them to be tortured for months in El Salvador. And they were willing to say at the time and before they sent them, if the federal court decided to order them to not send them, they were going to have to say F you to the court, which they ended up doing. So, but the Department of Justice is going to be on trial. That's really the bottom line. Judge Bogsberg, who is the chief judge at the district court in the Washington, D.C., he's quite intent on following through on his contempt of court investigation of the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice wanted to change the subject and make it the Department of Homeland Security, but that's not going to work.
And I think what's interesting, Louis, that he did in his last order, which I know it's making people crazy over at Department. I love it. They asked if they could not show up in person initially, and if they could file affidavits. And he said, sure, which I love doing because, first of all, the affidavit's going to be bullshit, I know, or they're not going to say anything. And then if they do stake out a position, when they get to court before him, as they surely will, those affidavits are going to be just gold for cross-examination of the person, whoever that government agent is. And those affidavits always fall apart. And I think it could engender some, well, I was going to say not this department, but it should engender some criminal charges. And the statute will still be open in 2028. But I guarantee you those affidavits are going to be fertile ground for examination.
Yeah, we're looking forward to having an opportunity to see what is said. So essentially, the Department of Justice tried to get off the hook. They're going to be on trial. Department of Homeland Security is not going to be scot-free either. But that wasn't the architect of the decisions to defy the courts. And that's what the contempt is all about.
Are there any other cases that you might want to mention? I mean, because obviously the Department of Defense and all things Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly, and the orders and illegal orders and all of these other things. It seems like that's front and center to the other side of the conversations that we've been discussing.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, we have just been putting together a Know Your Rights campaign for national security members, as well as the military services and National Guard. And we were just in the middle of putting together basically a Know Your Rights campaign around the issue of the military code of justice, which is essentially a statute that declares, as we all now know, that declares that you not only can you disobey an illegal order, you have to. It's your duty. And then now we're still putting this together, but we pretty much have a huge educational, I guess, that we have now, all of us experienced the education that we thought we were going to have to perform. So we're quite pleased with the video that the members of Congress put out, and certainly thought it was quite instructive that the president decided that he was going to, to try to kill these people, at least wanting to.
Patrick, can I respond to Mark's data point about data just briefly? So there's another side to Palantir having the data, and that is, and it was exposed when they caught the alleged bomber, the person who dropped the bomb, allegedly dropped the bombs at the RNC and the DNC, and that is something that I've been talking about for a long time, in particular about getting some sort of Manhattan Project together to figure out how to deal with data, because as we saw in that case, in the bomber case, the FBI and federal law enforcement has so much data, and they have such antiquated means to review it, that they really don't know what to do with all the data. And it is this data that solves crimes. And now with AI, and Bill and Dan know this very well, and everything is electronic now, and getting federal law enforcement to understand how to create algorithms, or AI now, to analyze and look at data is a huge problem. And it's one of the only ways you're going to tackle high level white collar crime, with the movements of money and fraudsters and things like that. You can only do it with this kind of data. And now the problem has been exposed here. It took us 6 years, took FBI 6 years to actually apply, and they only started doing it recently, to apply the data they had. I give Bongino a little bit of credit for actually being on it like stink on shit, only because he's a mental midget, but he at least forced the FBI to look at this stuff. And so I think it exposes a huge problem. And then you have companies like Palantir who actually have the wherewithal and capacity to filter this data in an anti-law enforcement way, right? In what I believe is an evil way. But there's got to be a way to marry that technology, to use it now. And obviously we're talking about that now as if the department would ever give a shit about that. But in due time, the federal government's going to have to find a way to use the data that Palantir now has, or the technology that Palantir now has, to analyze data to go after high-level frauds and high-level crime. And I don't anticipate it's going to happen for a long time.
In Paul, low-level crime too. So, instead of
True,
sending the
true.
National Guard to Memphis, create a, and we started doing, and this was rudimentary in 2007, 2008 when we started doing this. And I actually did a CLE training of lawyers yesterday on AI, and ethics, and for lawyers using AI, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
We would set up centers. The AG's office brought federal and state resources together to create data centers. You can identify crime trends. You can identify. You want to stop street crime in America. Data is a much more effective tool than West Virginia National Guards people patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C., and it's not going to get shot
Yeah.
under any circumstances. It's such a better, and yet, so if they really cared about urban crime, you're exactly right. That's what they'd be doing. If anybody ever cares about white collar crime someday, I mean, imagine, Patrick, what you could have done with all your investigation of the mortgage fraud situation with a subscription to Claude.
Yeah.
Here we are, 7, 8 years later. So the patterns, the relationships, they can easily be revealed, and they can be demonstrated. So you're exactly right. I mean, it could be a great crime fighting tool, but in the hands of the criminals, it's absolutely horrifyingly scary.
Yep. And that's what we did with the healthcare strike forces. We said, hey, Medicare has all this data. Why aren't we looking at it in a central way, and then watching where the crimes are happening as they're starting, and then we can go attack them. And it was just, I mean, a bunch of third graders doing it. Now you could do it with AI. It'd be a lot easier.
Right.
There's a whole literature on this in criminology. And it's been one of the great frustrations of criminologists, the unwillingness to do it. And our success in the savings and loan debacle and the banking debacle was making use of the examiner's data. We realized we had this massive amount of data that would not only establish who would committed the crime, it would actually provide information that you could admit as evidence and demonstrate the fraud. And it was mobilizing that and creating the criminal referral process, which is another data system,
Yep.
after all,
Yep.
of
Mhm.
how we
Yep.
convey that to the FBI and the Department of Justice, that allowed all of those convictions. So it
Well,
does work. Yes,
well,
we know.
Does work. Absolutely work.
absolutely. But to the audience, and to Mark's point, had we been able to take those shortcuts, I would never have tapped the mother of all gushers with your collective knowledge that the American people need to understand that we know people that know how to reset the table if we could ever get millions of people behind a critical mass to do so. And I want to give you the last word, Bill, from this perspective. And you've been as straight a shooter. I've been so fortunate to know you throughout the years, but I'd say the last several months, I've never seen you speak so declaratively about just the insanity that we're seeing. And I bring up again Mark Kelly in his hour and a half speech was
Well, that's
his
where I wanted to go
okay.
directly to that, because first it came out that the training manual at the Pentagon, when it gives an example of an illegal order, is expressly this case, right? And it's revealed that Hegseth 8 years ago, 10 years ago, gave a talk publicly in which he essentially said identically what the Democrats had said. So they took something that they knew was a completely lawful, appropriate statement and applied to their conduct and said, you should die because you said what we say. You should die. We will put your name out there. We will say that you are someone endangering the lives of everyone, that you betrayed your nation, the most heinous crime of any responsible American leader, or especially people from the military and intelligence community. And we will not provide you with security. And if someone kills you, we'll pardon them. This pardon power has gotten way too little attention. We've, the immunity, yes, immense, disastrous, but in connection with the pardon power, this, under this administration, is going to allow people to murder people with impunity. They've already shown that they're willing to let out the absolute scum of the earth, that they can get pardons. People who, under their own logic about drugs, are responsible for killing at least hundreds of thousands of Americans, and they give them pardons. You think they won't pardon somebody who kills one of the senators or members of Congress? That's what's coming next.
Talking about perverse incentives, right? My God, you just laid out the worst of the worst that we've seen over the course of savings and loan through now. But this,
They
to me,
use the absolute ones that are not reviewable by the courts. And on top of that, they've got the court in their back pocket, six of them. You should not assume that there will be elections, right? It'll only be if the American people force elections that there will be elections, if the polls continue to go in the direction. And on that note, there are now statistics on the number of grand juries that said no to indictments. And the figure was five out of, I think, 150,000. And there have already been what? So that's older data. There have already
Yeah.
been something like six
Yep.
grand juries. that often for the same person 4 times or 3 times that have refused to indict. That's the most optimistic thing I've heard about Americans. They're a broad chunk of regular people that have got the idea these people are fascists. These people hate the rule of law. They use law as a weapon to destroy the innocent because they're political enemies and they lie to us to get it done. And once that message has to get out there, and we need more and more grand juries and probably eventually criminal juries to say, no, hell no. You people are liars and you are fascists, and we are not going to indict. We are not going to prosecute your political enemies.
Well, this has been one of the most profound and powerful hours that we've been together in our roughly a year together on the new Untouchables, and it's gone so fast, and it's so important. I don't want to leave that lingering. Would everybody like to give a closing comment before we shove off, or are we good? I welcome anybody to chime in if you feel like saying something.
I'm good.
Yeah, I think Bill said it well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I will just encourage, look, the audience, you've got to understand, like the great David Burns said, and I hate to take away something so prolifically profound as what we've just heard for the last hour, but for my generation, we have a sense of humor, but this ain't no party. This ain't no disco. This ain't no fooling around. This is life during wartime. This is an absolute abomination of what this country is about being played out in front of our eyes. And we see the reaction by tens of millions of people every day through social media, but we're not organized. The Democratic Party does not have I don't want to be partisan here, but they don't have a plan to deal with the corruption requisite of what we're seeing. This team does. This team has the experience. We have to pay attention to them. We have to follow their leadership. They have plans, and we have it all laid out in the new Untouchables. Please check that out. Please check out thecleannewdeal.org. Please check out the Government Accountability Project. I'll have links to everybody's information and bio down below. If you're a journalist, please reach out to me. We have to get these voices out there to the American people to penetrate the bubble, because as we see on a daily basis through these algorithms, we're in the midst of a sea shift, but they change. They're able to move the goalposts on us on a daily basis. We can't maintain focus because we're overwhelmed with the information. But there's a way to deal with this, and we've got the plan, and we've got the experts to be able to lead us out of this madness. So thank you for tuning in, and guys, thank you so much for being involved as always, and I'll look forward to speaking with you next week. All the best.
See you next week.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.